this is a longer question, but how do you start thinking jazzy? Okay, so I'm a blues guy through and through. I started. B.B. King was first. Albert King, Albert Collins, T-Bone Walker, Muddy Waters, Otis Rush, Magic Sam, down the line. These are my heroes, right? And still, I was obsessed with music and with learning. I still am. So I'm always wanting to learn new stuff. And as a kid, I was fortunate enough to run into many adult players who would give me little tips along the way and things to work on. And the way it started for me was when I realized by someone telling me this, that the difference between a jazz guy and a rock guy or a blues guy is a jazz guy connects the chords. Now, you've all heard the phrase playing over the changes, right? Now, playing over the changes means you're playing things that fit over each chord, which means chord tones. So if you play a G13 chord, you're going to play the notes from that G13 chord while you're soloing to highlight that chord. That means chord tones. So yes, that's playing over changes. But playing through changes is what jazz guys really, really do. That means not only do they know all of the a million things you can play over every chord, which there's tons and tons of stuff you could play over every chord, then there's also all the things you do to connect this chord to the next chord and make it a seamless transition between chords. Because if you listen to, let's say, a rock guy like Satriani or Eric Johnson or Steve Vai or any rock guy, normally, unless the song is a very diatonic song that stays blues the whole way, so let's say it's like a rock changes, you know what I mean? Something like that. You could just play G blues over that whole thing. But if it's got some more changes into it, a lot of rock guys will sound like they're changing keys when another chord comes up, right? So if it goes E, a rock guy will probably play something like that, right? Which is melodic and ticks the boxes, but they're not playing through the changes. A jazz guy will take that same thing and use certain devices to connect those chords. So the way that was explained to me as a kid was really simply. And also Bruce Foreman, if you ever want to learn this stuff, look up Bruce Foreman. He's the best jazz guitar player I know, and he has incredible lessons, and I hang out with him all the time in LA. But anyways, if you just start with playing rhythm guitar, like a blues, an A. Say you're going from the 1 to the 4 chord, right? If you play rhythm, you're going to do something like this. And here comes the 4 chord, right? Now, a lot of times you'll play that little half step move, right? Just to lead you to the 4 chord. You don't even know you're doing it. You just do those types of things when you're playing rhythm guitar. Well, Bruce and other guys told me, well, why don't you do that in your solo? And I said, I don't understand what you mean. And he said, that's how you connect chords together. Well, it's one way that you can connect chords together. You already did it in your rhythm playing, so obviously it works. So play it in your solo. And I said, show me. So he did something like, and here comes a 4. Right? And I was like, oh, okay, do it again. And he played it backwards. And I realized it's just this. Right? And it was a big light bulb over my head of, wow, that's really simple, but I understand exactly what's going on there. You're just spelling out that little half-step chord. And he's like, yeah, and then you're on the 4, so what do you do on the 4? I said, you keep playing blues. And he's like, yeah, of course. And what comes next? And I said, well, sometimes when I'm playing rhythm, I go from the 4 to diminished chord, like up a half step from the 4. So that would be E flat diminish. Because you've all heard, like on a Freddie Green record, something. And he said, well, you could play that in your solo. And I didn't know a diminished scale yet or anything like that. But he just played. Right? And it was like us just spelling out this. And I was like, wow, that's amazing, right? And then another guy showed me, what else can you do on the four? And this guy said, have you ever listened to Ray Charles? I said, of course, I love Ray Charles. And he said, songs like Hard Times or Drown in My Own Tears, different ballads like that. Have you ever heard it when it goes from 4 to 4 minor? So that's this sound. And then resolve to the 1. I'm like, yeah, of course. I've heard that in Beatles songs, tons of Beatles songs. He's like, well, you could do that in your solo. And he played me a solo where the saxophone player from Ray Charles' band, the great Fathead Newman, played this. And it was like, oh my God. He's just going. And I was like, that's so simple. Like, you're just spelling out those chords you play when you play rhythm guitar. And he's like, yeah, that's exactly it. What's next? And I said, well, normally the 5. And he goes, well, how about you replace that with a 2-5-1 turnaround? I said, I don't know what that means. And he said, it's when you take away the 5 and you play the minor 2, then to the 5, in this case, a 13th chord, and then back to the 1. And I was like, okay, I think I understand. And he probably played some sort of arpeggio of B minor. So B to E. Something as simple as that, but it's... And it was like, wow. So you're just playing blues the whole time, but when the next chord's coming up, you're doing something to connect them. And he said, yeah, bingo, exactly. And he said, write this out on a piece of paper. Just write out 12 bars and write all those little in-between chords in. And then sit there and look at the piece of paper and solo. So that's what I did for the next 10 years. And, I just would look at this piece of paper, and eventually I'd move on from blues. I'd write random chord changes, and I'd try to figure out a way to connect them together so that you do things like this. Next thing I knew, I'd be trying to play these blues and hear those chords happen. So I'd be playing stuff like... So there you can hear almost everything I just showed you chord-wise. You hear it go by, right? And I'm just making that up on the spot. But I'm picturing those chords going by, somebody else playing them, and I'm highlighting those chord tones. And then you start learning more and more things that you can play over those chords. So like Bruce then said, that 2-5-1 that you just replaced in the blues turnaround? It's called a turnaround for a reason. You can use it to turn around to any chord. I said, I don't follow. And he goes, just use it to get to the 4 chord. I said, what do you mean? He goes, use the 2-5 of the chord you're going to next. And I come to find out, the song Giant Steps? That's what that entire song does, is change keys by playing 2-5-1s. It goes da-do-da, da-do-da, da-do-da. He's just playing 2-5-1, 2-5-1, 2-5-1 over and over, changing keys. And I was like, show me. So that same blues in A, instead of playing maybe that little half step to get to the 4, you could play, here comes a 2-5 to lead me to the 4. Now you can hear it, it automatically makes it sound like that 4 chord has to be next. Right? Its voice leads you to that chord. So then it became, okay, I can play that in my solo? And he went, yeah. And he probably played, or I played something like this. Right? And that was me playing E minor to A to D. And I realized, wait, can you do this to any chord? And he said, any chord. And it was like, wait a minute, I can turn myself around into anything. He said, absolutely. Because, it's the same thing a bass player does. When you hear a bass player go, well, he's playing 1-5. He's playing turnarounds constantly. You know what I mean? Like, doon, da, da, doon, doon. It's just a turnaround. So it's just one of the few tools that you can use to connect those chords. You use turnarounds, you use chromaticism, you use diminished or augmented chords, because diminished and augmented chords are altered chords. So they literally exist only to create tension. When you hear that chord, you have to hear this chord next. You know what I mean? It's like you have to hear that. So those phrases built around those chords automatically make your ear go towards whatever chord is next. So when I'm soloing, to answer this long question, I'm thinking, what chord is next? That's all I care about, because I've built up a lifetime of muscle memory and scales and ideas that I know, okay, this is an A7, I can play blah, 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 all these things over this A7. But what chord is next? Oh, crap, it's an F major 7. How do I make A go to F major 7? That's what I'm thinking always. Not what, when the chords are happening, I'm autopilot. It's only what's next. And that's the way you start thinking about those type of things. At least for me, that's how it worked. Because you realize it's not actually rocket science. Like, you can listen, when you listen to guys like John Scofield or John Coltrane or Wes Montgomery, it can sound so intimidating, because it's brilliant playing. But the actual theory behind it is just what I just told you. It's not rocket science. It's, what are the chords? How do you spell them out? Which is the first thing you got to learn. You've got to learn your circle of fifths and just know your intervals, so you know what notes are in each chord you play. And then what's chords is next, and how do you connect them together? That's the key.